Chapter 20. Wait, what? Chapter 8 of City of Ember. This one is going to be an interesting one. I know it will. I can never find the chapter where it starts. Okay. Sorry about that delay. Dune had taken the wandering to the pipeworks alone. He would go to his assigned tunnel and do his job quickly. Once you got good at using the wrenches and brushes and tubes of glue, it wasn't hard. Most of the workers did their jobs quickly and then gathered in little groups to play cards or have a salamander race or just talk and sleep. But Doom didn't care about any of that. If he was going to be stuck in the pipeworks, he would at least not waste any time that he had since the long blackout. Everything seemed more urgent than ever. Whenever the lights flickered, he was afraid of an ancient generator might be shuddering to a permanent halt. So while the others lounged around and headed toward the edges of the pipeworks to see what he could see, pay attention, his father had said. And that's what he did. He followed his map when he could, but in some places the map was unclear. There were even tunnels that didn't show up on the map at all. To keep from getting lost, he dropped a trail of things as he walked. Watchers, bolts, pieces of wire, whatever he had in his tool belt. Then he picked them up and went on his way back. His father had been at least a little bit right. There was interesting things in the pipeworks if he paid attention. Already he found 3 new crawling creatures, a black beetle the size of a pinhead, a moth with furry wings, and best of all, a creature with a soft, shiny body and a small, spiral-patterned shell on its back. Just after he found this one, while he was sitting on the floor watching his fascination as the creature crept up his arm, a couple of workers came by and saw him. They burst into laughter. "It's Bug Boy," one of them said. "He's collecting bugs for his lunch." Enraged Dune jumped up and shouted at them. His sudden motion made the creature fall off his arm to the ground, and Dune felt a crunch beneath his foot. The laughing workers didn't notice. They tossed a few more taunts at him and walked on. But Dune instantly knew what he'd done. He lifted his foot and looked at the squashed mess underneath. Unintended consequences, he thought miserably. He was angry at his anger. It surged up and took over. He picked bits of the shell and threw off the sole of his boot and thought, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you." In the days that followed, Dune went farther and farther into the pipeworks, holding the hope that he might find something not only interesting but important. But what he found didn't seem important at all. Once he came up to an old pair of pliers that someone had dropped and left behind. Twice he had found a coin. He discovered a supply closet that appeared to have been completely forgotten, but all it held were some boxes of plugs and washers and a rusty box containing shriveled bits of what must have once been someone's lunch. He found another supply closet at the far south end of the pipeworks. At least he assumed that's what it was. At the end of the tunnel there was a rope strung across it. A sign hanging from the rope said, "Caved in, no entry." Dune entered anyways. Ducking under the rope, he found no sign of a cave-in, but there were no lights. He groped his way forward for 20 steps or so, and there the tunnel ended in a securely locked door. He couldn't see it, but he felt it. He retraced his steps and ducked back under the rope again and walked on into the short distance away. He found a hatch in the ceiling of the tunnel, a square wooden panel that must lead through up to the storerooms. If he'd had something to stand on, he could have reached and tried to open it, but it was a foot above his head. Probably it was locked anyhow. He wondered if the builders had used openings like this one during the construction of the city to get more easily from one place to another. One day, when his job was near the main tunnel, he sometimes walked along the river. After he'd finished working, he stayed away from the east end where the generator was. He didn't want to think about the generator. Instead, he went the other way toward the place where the river rushed out of the pipeworks. The path grew less level at this end and less smooth. The river here bordered the clumps of wrinkled rock that seemed to grow out of the ground like fungus. Doom liked to sit on these clumps, running his fingers along the strange creases and crevices that have been carved somehow by running, dripping water. In some places were grooves that almost looked like writing. But as far as things of importance, Doom found none. It seemed the pipeworks was no use after all. To a person who wanted to save the city, a generator was hopeless. He could never understand the electricity he used. He used to think he could use electricity to invert a movable light. He studied hard enough. He took apart light bulbs and he took apart electric outlets in the wall to see how the wires inside would wind together. And the process got painful. A vibrating jolt through his body, and he tried to wind the wires of his own together exactly the same way. Nothing happened. It came through. The wires made a light. He finally understood. He had no idea what it was. Now he could only see two courses of action. He could give up and do nothing, or he could start to work on a different kind of movable light. Dune didn't want to give up. So on his day off, one Thursday, he went to Ember Library to look up fire. The library occupied an entire building on one of the sides of Bilbolio Square. Its door was at the end of a short passage in the middle of the building. Dune went down the passage, pushed open the door, and walked in. No one was there except for the librarian, Ancient Edward Pocket, who sat behind his desk, writing something in a tiny pencil clutched in his gnarled hand. The library had two big rooms, one for fiction, which was stories people made up out of their imagination, or other for fact, which was information about the real world. The walls in both rooms were lined with shelves, and most of the shelves were hundreds of packets of pages. Each packet was held together with short loops coming out with string. The packets leaned against each other like angles. They lay unsteadily in stacks. Some were thick and some were so slim that only a clip needed to hold them together. The pages of the oldest packets were yellow and wrapped the edges of uneven ripples. These were books of ember, written over the years by its citizens. They contained their close-written pages, much that were imagined, and everything was known. Edward Pocket looked up and nodded briefly at Dune, one of his most frequent visitors. Dune nodded back. He went into the fact room, to the section of F, the books that were arranged by subject. Even so, it wasn't so easy to find what you wanted. A book about moths for instance, might be under M for moths, or I for insects, or B for bugs, or might even be under F for flying things. Usually you had to browse through the entire library to make sure you'd found all the books on one subject. But since he was looking for fire, he thought he might as well start with F. Fire was rare, remember. When there was a fire, it was because of an accident. Someone had left the towel too close to an electric burner on the stove, or a cord had frayed a spark and flown out and igniting curtains. Then citizens would rush in with buckets of water, and the fire was quickly drowned. But it was, of course, possible to start a fire on purpose. You could hold silver wood to the stove burner until it burst into flame and then go for a moment. It would flare brightly, giving off an orange light. The trick was to find a way to make the light last. If you had a light that would keep going, you could out into the unknown regions and see what was there. Finding a way to explore the unknown regions is the only thing Dune could think of. He took the book down from the shelf. Fungus is what it was called. He put it back. The next book was called How to Repair Furniture. He put that back too. He went through foot diseases, fun with string, coping with failure, and canned fruit recipes before he finally found a book called All About Fire. He sat down at one of the library square tables to read. The person written the book knew no more about fire than Dune. Mostly the book described the dangers of fire. A long section was about building Winford's Square that was caught fire 45 years ago. Now all of its doors and furniture had burned up and smoke filled up the air for days. Another part was about what to do if your oven caught fire. Dune closed the book inside. It was useless. He could write a better book than that. He got up and wandered restlessly around the library. Sometimes he could find useful things just by choosing randomly on the shelves. He had done this many times, just reached out and grabbed something, in the hope by an accident might come up with every piece of information he needed. It would be something that another person had written down without understanding the significance of the sentence. Or two that would be a flash of light in Dune's mind, fitting together things already knew to make a solution. Although he had often found something interesting, he never found anything important. Today was no different. He came across an old collection